Hello and welcome to the Murder Media Podcast, where we analyse and overthink true crime content. I'm your host, Dr. Stella Marie Gaynor. You can follow the Murder Media Project over on Instagram and Facebook at murdermedia81, that's the numbers 81, or email me directly at murdermedia81@gmail.com. And you can find all episodes linked via the WordPress site, Podbean, and you can find the episodes on Spotify, Amazon Music, and the Apple one, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, whatever it is. Thank you again to Dr. Tom Watson for joining me last week again, and I can't stress this enough. It's really fun to do these with other people rather than just me talking awkwardly to myself. But friends, this is it. This is going to have to be the last episode in the first series of the Murder Media Podcast. Aww. I know, we've had fun. Or I hope we've had fun. I hope you've had fun. I hope you've enjoyed it. But it's time for me to concentrate on semester one. So I pre-record these, and as I record this episode, teaching starts next week. So my head needs to be fully in that game rather than this game. And I also need to get on with writing those 2 chapters so that the Murder Media book proposal can finally be sent off to their prospective publisher. Now, like all things in life, the Murder Media Podcast, or, researching it, writing it, recording it, re-recording it, this is me recording this intro for the 5th time, editing and producing the Murder Media Podcast, it's been a right task. I'm thinking back, so I'm not sure how hard I thought this would be. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I thought it would be really easy, and it turns out that it's not. It turns out that it's really hard, and it takes longer than you think. But the plan was always to do the Murder Media Podcast in series form. That means I can arrange it around my teaching and around my marking commitments. So I thought I'd wrap up this first series with an exploration of how I see the book shaping up. What have I done over the last few weeks and months that have allowed me to sort of lay out the book so that I can sort of see how it will go. And the goal of this podcast was to podcast the journey, I suppose, of me researching and writing the book, because the project was always going to culminate in a monograph, in a book. But I also wanted to podcast the journey of just thinking through these things and talking to other friends, other colleagues, other academics about this subject. And another main goal of the podcast was to get my research and my work out there, sort of out beyond the ivory tower, I guess, of university. So it is going to culminate in a book. Academic books are notoriously expensive, so it's good to have another place for my research to be accessible. And it's also good fun to make podcasts with friends and with colleagues that, I've done one with Shelley and Laura and Tom this series, and they've been really, really fun. So I'd like to do some more of that next series, and I'll certainly try and bring those 3 back. The Murder Media book, final title to be confirmed. I think a lot of things will be to be confirmed in this episode. The process of writing an academic book is a long one, as I'm sure you can imagine. Not just the actual writing of it, but all the stuff that needs to come first before I get down to the actual writing. So the idea, the research question, what's the book going to be about? And I hope that we all know that by now. So Murder Media, how are these stories told across media platforms? What impact do the conditions, industries, strategies, production practices, what impact do they all have on the stories? Before the book can go ahead though, it needs to go through a proposal process, which is hard to say. Each publisher has their own template of what they want in the proposal, and there are lots of similarities between publishers, but there's also some differences. Now at this point, I'm not going to say which publisher I'm going for. I'm pretty certain which one I'm going for, but there's always the chance it'll get rejected. You never know. And I don't want any of you going after them with pitchforks. So Laura, Shelley, I'm looking at you. As I asked Shelley a couple of weeks ago, because me and Shelley have accountability meetings together where we help support each other with our research. But as we talked about, it's like, well, what's the worst thing that happens? If the proposal gets rejected at the publisher that I have in mind, then just go to another one, right? So it's good that the templates for each publisher have some similarities in them, but I would rather it get picked up by the first publisher and I don't have to rewrite the proposal. Anyway, the way that the book is shaping up, I'm quite happy with. I'm starting to be able to see it come together. The book will be a critical analysis of the development of what I am calling murder media, and it's going to identify key shifts in attitudes to true crime. Now, this is the basis from which my PhD and my first monograph, Rethinking Horror, started. I noted an increase in the production of this media, or what Richard Nowell said in his 2001 book on slasher films, a quote, a spike in production levels, end quote. Nowell constructs an industry-focused model of the cycle, of the spike that he talks about, and he concentrates on the industrial conditions and decisions that shape production, that shape the content and shape the distribution of the slasher films that he bases his study on. Nowell said that we can observe these spikes in production as cycles, and he says that we can observe them as, quote, distinct phases of activity in which industrial development, marker shifts and changing commercial imperatives underwrite production and distribution of a film type. The industrial perspective is one that explains the manner in which film cycles unfold rather than shifts in film content, end quote. Now this quote Like I said, it was a solid base for my PhD. It was a solid base for my monograph. So I guess it's one of my favourite quotes. I come back to that quite a lot. But for me, it's how I understand, and I suppose it's my way in to researching media. And I've said a few times, I really like looking at the industrial conditions. How and why is that being made, and what's the impact being made on the final media product? So as I did it with TV horror, I observed, researched, wrote about and outlined a clear cycle of TV horror in the USA. And there is a cycle as defined by Nowell's explanation, by the quote I've just used, and by the parameters that I have drawn way back in the first episode. I talked about the parameters of the project, UK and US media, solved cases, etc. There is a cycle of murder media, and it is observable and it's distinct. And that's what the book's going to be exploring. Back to Nowell's spike in production. Most of the spike that I will be examining in the book, and, across the murder media project more generally, occurs in the 2010s and 2020s, or well, up to 23, 24. I can't see into the future yet. And I think my earliest case study is 2002, which is the film about Dahmer starring Jeremy Renner. As I chatted with Shelley about, one of the first things that I'll do is to plot the release and distribution patterns of the murder media. So I'll start around 2000, 2002 with the Dahmer film up to the present day. And then I'll be able to see where the spike really is, where it properly went wild, and what's been happening to it in the years like before and after the spike. So these cycles then, there was a cycle of TV horror. I think we're in a cycle of murder media, but cycles don't last. That's why it's cycle and not a constant. But there's always, says Nowell, a, quote, base level of production, end quote. True crime has been consistent for decades, centuries even. Remember I talked about the execution sermons way back in episode 1? It has always had a base level of production. And in recent years, there's been a spike in production, what I think is an observable cycle. I have said many times on this podcast that there's more true crime media because there's more media, and that's true. There's just more stuff around for any genre. What I'm sort of trying to avoid is addressing the question of, well, why true crime now? And it's like, well, it's always been around. We know that. But what I mean is that true crime or murder media, it's not new. It's always had an audience, and it's always had a base level of production. But with more media comes more true crime media. With more entry points to production, podcasts, social media, YouTube, comes more voices, more ways to tell stories, and therefore the aforementioned shifts in attitude, shifts in conditions, production practices, distribution, strategies. They all create a cycle of murder media that is on the first hand, clearly there, and then second, is well worth exploring. Because all of these new media forms give us these new ways to understand these crimes and to understand why they happened, how they happened, and probably more importantly, to listen to who they happened to. Over the last few weeks, well, let's be honest, months, over the last few months, because everything always takes longer than you think, I've been planning out what each book chapter will cover. Now that does form part of the book proposal. It's quite a big chunk of the book proposal. So they want an outline of each chapter, about, say, 300 words per chapter. I think the publisher that I'm going for, who shall not be named at this stage, they've said like a paragraph per chapter. And I understand a paragraph to be about 300 words-ish. Now, I went a bit wild with this, and I've got at least a full page for each chapter, some even longer. I think one of the chapters is at least 3 pages in its outline. I will have to edit it down before I send it. But for me, it's really helpful to go through that process now. When I come to actually researching and writing the chapters, I've got these really detailed outlines, so it's doing a bit of the work in advance. It helps me to see the book. If I've got lots of detail for each chapter, the chapters aren't anywhere near written. I don't let this sound like it'll be easier when it comes to write the chapters, but because I've got so much detail, I've talked about each case study in the chapter outlines. It helps me to see where the book's going, helps me to see the book in its entirety, to be able to sort of step back from it a little bit, and also to start to plot the threads that run through the book and where I can start to connect things, connect ideas to each other. I'm sorry if this is giving any of you degree essay writing flashbacks. I'm sorry. What other threads? Are you doing enough analysis? Have you got enough sources? No, you haven't. Do some more. Anyway, let's kind of have a walk through then some of the finalised case studies for each chapter, and very roughly, very broadly, what each chapter is going to do. After the introduction, obviously comes first, the introductory chapter, which is an introduction, so I don't think I need to explain it more than that. Also, I'm going to have to be a bit cagey about this. The introduction contains some definitions that I don't want to release to the world yet, because I'm still working on them, and they're a little bit secret, and they're mine. I don't want them to be out there just yet. But after the introduction, the first chapter will start with documentary. I've decided to split the Netflix documentaries off into their own chapter. So the Conversations with the Killer, the Tapes trilogy, for example, won't appear in this documentary chapter. So I probably should explain here actually that each chapter is going to be a different media form. So introduction, then a chapter on documentary, one on film, one on podcasts, etc. I was always thinking about shifting the Netflix stuff off to its own chapter anyway. That was always something rolling around in my brain. But after our episode with Dr. Shelley McMurdo, that really cemented it for me. So Shelley and I talked about the Netflix gloss, and I think it's worth discussing all of that away from documentary in its more traditional form. And also, I've always got a lot to say about Netflix strategies. Always got a lot to say. So, for instance, in the UK, Netflix now shows adverts on the lowest tier of subscription. And I've been banging on to everyone who will listen, mainly my family, I think, that, Netflix was going to have to do something about the huge money deficit that they were in. And it was either going to be perhaps a takeover or we'll all end up seeing adverts. And I was right, and I've got adverts. So next time you're rolling your eyes about the adverts on Netflix, I told you so. Okay, so this first chapter on documentary, stay focused. My key theorist here is Stella Brucey. Like Shelley and I said, researching documentary theory and form is so boring and so tedious, and I can't really be arsed expanding too much on it, quite frankly. And I don't need to, I'm not defining what a documentary is in this book, neither am I defining what a podcast is or what a comic is or any of those things. I'm more looking at how the form affects the telling of the story, right? So I don't need to spend too much time actually trying to come up with my own perfect exploration and definition of what documentary is. So I make it easy on myself and using existing work from Stella Brucey to frame my understanding and analysis of documentary. So what Brucey says it is, that's what I'm saying it is as well. What I'm particularly interested in here is the negotiation, as Stella Brucey says, the negotiation between the real and the representation of the real, and how the temporal distance offers a revisionist version of events or a re-narrativization of events. So as these murder stories are retold, perhaps with the distance of, say, maybe 30 years, they can be understood differently, with more context, with more empathy. And an absolute belter of a documentary to demonstrate this is the BBC commissioned documentary series, The Yorkshire Ripper Files, a very British crime story. If you've not seen it, I insist that you pause me, shut me up, and go and watch it. A very British crime story was commissioned by BBC 4, who at the time tagged themselves as A Place to Think. And bloody hell did this documentary make me think. It revisits the Sutcliffe case and represents it through the eyes of women and through a better understanding of 1970s misogynies. And God, it does. It's so good. So if we step back and think about BBC 4, I know they don't make new content now, but they still were back in 2019 when this doc was commissioned. If we think about the impulse to retell the story, to, as BBC 4 say they want to do, to make us think, then we think about the broader aims of BBC, their aims to educate, to inform. We can see this at work in the documentary series. It tells the story of a serial killer, yes, but he is not at the forefront. The context, the women, the failed manhunt, this is the story being told. This chapter will also look closely at Mummy, Dead and Dearest, the HBO documentary. Now this doc edits together a lot of home video footage from the Blanchard family, trying to explain what happened to Gypsy and what happened later to Dee Dee. So it's a weird one, this one. All the documentaries and films and TV series and podcasts, etc., they're all made after the fact. We can't make a doc about a murder before it happens. This isn't a Tom Cruise film, but this documentary's main tactic is to edit together home movies made by Dee Dee to create a more sinister record of events. So knowing what we know now, it was a Munchausen syndrome by proxy, although I don't even think that term's used anymore. I apologise if I'm getting that wrong. Knowing what we know now, knowing that it was a case of Munchausen's by proxy, these snippets of Dee Dee and Gypsy take on a very sinister second meaning. So for instance, there's a clip where Dee Dee and Gypsy are indoors and they're filming themselves sort of lolling around on a bed, and they're indoors because of the snow. Heavy snow outside, and Dee Dee's saying they're not going outside and that Gypsy isn't going anywhere. And yeah, Gypsy was a prisoner of sorts, we know that now. But these clips, it's like HBO's standing over us going, but she meant something much worse, with a cartoon evil laugh. Now we know what was really going on. She wasn't talking about the snow, she was talking about keeping Gypsy prisoner. And it's like, well, yeah, but I don't think when Dee Dee was making these clips, making these videos, that she was thinking that way. Oh, I don't know. We don't know what ever really went on. It's just really weird the way it's been put together. So I'll be unpacking that one in good detail. This chapter will also look at The Murder Network, a documentary about Marcel Petiot. Remember, he's the French serial killer that I looked at, a comic, The Butcher of Paris. I looked at that a couple of episodes ago. There'll be some other documentaries in there as well, but I'm going to move on. Let's think about TV dramatizations.
This is the state's case against Gypsy Rose Blanchard.
She's got paraplegia, epilepsy, heart murmur, and she's allergic to sugar. Everything I do for her.
My mom is my best friend. All she wants to do is keep me safe.
Gypsy!
Have you been able to confirm the girl's medical history?
Which part?
Any of it?
That's what being a mom is, never being sure you're doing the right thing, but doing it anyway.
I'm with the Children's Division of Missouri Social Services.
Open. Gypsy's got the mind of a 7-year-old.
How old are you?
Oh, she's 15, born in 1995.
I thought you said I was born in 1993.
I'm just going to ask you a few questions, all right? Can you read?
Do you love me?
What are you giggling about? I met my Prince Charming. Hi.
I never once disrespected my mama the way you do.
I'm so trapped. And I can't tell anyone.
You can tell me.
Nobody's gonna ever do more for you than I do.
She's never gonna let us be together.
Sooner or later, everybody knows everything about everyone.
Gypsy Rose Blanchard, how do you plead?
Another chapter in the book, then, will be TV dramatisations or serialisations. Sticking with the Blanchards, The Act from Hulu is an 8-part series that tells the same story, but with all the affordances of a dramatisation, of a serialised TV drama, all the storytelling space that it has. The Act takes us behind the closed doors, behind the barriers that were impenetrable before. So The Act takes us behind this is what she really meant, did she mean something else with this, off-the-cuff remark that we get in Mummy, Dead and Dearest? The Act shows us what happened. Or, really, it shows us a version of what happened. Because it's a drama, it's not fact. But with the central component of the Blanchard case being that no one knew what was going on until it was too late, the Act shows us what was going on, now that we know, after the fact, after the trial, and after the details came out. I'm also going to cover Des and The Long Shadow from ITV as well, and probably, certainly, Dharma Monster from Netflix. And I'll also get to, in this chapter, The Staircase, the HBO drama. Toni Collette is incredible in it, as is Colin Firth, who plays Peterson. So Toni Collette plays Kathleen Peterson and Colin Firth plays Michael Peterson, and it's incredible performances from both of them. This version of the Peterson murder tells the story from a number of perspectives, again, in the storytelling space that is allowed of a TV dramatisation, of a serialised format of an hour's worth of content every week. We get perspectives from various members of the Peterson family. We get Kathleen's point of view, which is fascinating, and we also get some really in-depth work in the Staircase drama series from the French documentary filmmakers. So we see them working on their film. The Staircase was originally a documentary made by a bunch of French filmmakers, got picked up by Netflix. Netflix saw fit to make 3 more episodes, I think, to make it even longer than it was, and then this is a dramatised version of that murder. The Staircase then, as I said way back in episode 1, shows us the 3 death/murder theories. Again, I won't go through this again, but it's 3 theories as to why Kathleen died. So before I mention the BBC 4 aims, with The Staircase, I will contextualise this inside HBO's aims, and contextualise it by thinking about HBO's previous dramas. HBO is all about narrative complexity and morally ambiguous characters, so think about Oz, The Wire, The Sopranos, etc. So The Staircase might be a true story, but all the players in the story fit right in at HBO.
You think you're smarter than him. You think you're going to be the one that's going to get him to confess.
Well, I don't think I'm smarter, sir. I don't think you necessarily have to be smarter.
This is what's going to happen. He will come down. He'll toy with you for a little while.
Does your son know what you do?
He knows his daddy protects people.
He will cat and mouse with you. He will make you think you are getting somewhere.
Press record and let's get this party started.
It is February 13th, 1986. This is Agent Bill Hagmeyer. I'm sitting with Theodore.
No, Ted.
I'm sitting with Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy has 13 hours to live, and he is using those hours to try and buy himself more time.
He's ready to talk. He said he's ready to confess to everything, but only talk to one person. There are families out there looking for answers.
The world needs to know why he killed those girls.
You're some hotshot young upstart, and I'm your next big case. You're gonna be the guy who broke me. There are a lot of myths and misunderstandings about me.
What are you going to tell me?
Everything.
What do you think he wants?
You and I will sit down and have the conversation you've wanted this whole time.
When you get too close to a guy like this, you could lose your way.
Do you think you could kill somebody?
I'm an FBI agent.
That's not what I'm saying.
You can't hold these girls hostage.
I'm not playing games.
How many did you kill?
Let's say 30.
Let's say we talk about the real number.
30 is a nice round number. You're getting inside my head.
I'm looking for understanding.
You think they should kill me, don't you? You think it's my time to die?
Frankly, they probably should have done it a long time ago.
I'm going to take you somewhere that I've never taken anyone before. I need a moment with Bill. He's my best friend.
Yep, he's back. Bullshitting to the end, Bundy went for the old bones for time play, to confess and buy himself more time alive, to buy another stay of execution by promising confessions or details. With so many unsolved murders, and with Bundy refusing to admit what he'd done until the electric chair was mere hours away, he thought that if he promised to tell everything, they'd refrain from flipping that switch. This film, No Man of God, starring Elijah Wood as Bill Hagmaier and Luke Kirby as Bundy, is what we call a two-hander. So this is a script-led film, which for the most part is just these two men sat around a table. The film plays at times like a theatre piece, and at others it's like we're in an episode of Mindhunter. And what I find most interesting about No Man of God is the position it places its audience, privileging those that are in the know. So me and Shelley talked about how we return to murder stories, we return to true crime stories, because there is a comfort and there is a pleasure in already knowing the story. So this film, No Man of God, opens with the Real newscast reporting that Bundy's been officially declared dead, and it assumes then that the audience knows who he is and why he might be dead. I'll also explore Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, the Berlinger film that pretty much accompanies his conversations with the killer, the Ted Bundy tapes. Extremely Wicked stars Zac Efron as Bundy, and the intertextual baggage here is wild. Absolutely wild. Think about it, Zac Efron, he was in that High School Musical, wasn't he? And then he's here playing Bundy, Jesus. But come back for Series 2 of the Murder Media podcast to hear all about that in detail, because I'll have written the chapter by then, hopefully. That's a big promise, isn't it? Mate, will I done? I don't know. Difficult to say. Come back for Series 2 to hear more about the intertextual baggage, more about the production techniques used in Extremely Wicked to flip the story, to tell it from the perspective of Liz Kendall. Other films in this chapter would be My Friend Dahmer, the film just titled Dahmer, and Ed Gein, Butcher of Plainfield. Netflix then, worth its own chapter I think. I'll look at their particular version of the Murder Media documentary. The closed circuit of financing, ownership and distribution, says Sharma, is not all that different to the old Hollywood studio system as it locks in creative personnel. So Netflix finances, owns and distributes its own content, and it locks in creative personnel and keeps them on big contracts. So I think I mentioned in Series 1, Episode 1 of the podcast that they've done this with Ryan Murphy. I think they've done it with Berlinger as well. Netflix seeks to define itself as having what Amanda Lotz called prized content, something HBO has done for a long time. This sees a Netflix gloss applied to its true crime documentaries. This chapter will of course explore the conversations with the Killer trilogy, Bundy, Gacy and Dahmer. I'll explore all the weird as fuck nostalgia that these documentary series has, a tactic that Netflix uses to target older subscribers. I'll examine in detail the quote right kind of masculinity that the tape series presents, particularly the Bundy and Gacy ones, and how they set up the killers as duplicitous and the authorities as kind of folk heroes and the authorities as, the right kind of masculinity as gentlemen. I look at the fetishization of the tape player, which comes back again in Memories of Murder, the Nielsen tapes. Now this series in particular blends true crime with all kinds of things. There's a distinctive romantic art house horror gloss on that series, which I'm pretty sure if Nielsen watched it himself, I'm pretty sure that he'd approve of it, which is, troubling. Anyway, back in episode 4, Laura and I mentioned Sins of Our Mother, the Netflix documentary that looks at the Vallow Daybell case. Now, this really is an example of Netflix Murder Gloss 101. When this documentary came out in 2022, the Vallow Daybell case was still unfolding. The case was it was massive on social media, much like the Chris Watts case. The Vallow Daybell case blew up across social media as well, as everybody was trying to find those kids. Do you remember? Netflix then jumped on this as soon as they could, and they got the documentary out. And like all the Netflix docs, we get the same information just doled out bit by bit to stretch the content to a 3-parter. And I don't think in 2022 that they actually had enough content to make it a 3-parter because everything was still unfolding. But Netflix wanted to get the doc out. They knew how popular the right word? How engaged people were with this crime online and social media, so they jumped to get the documentary out, and that might bring over new subscribers. In this chapter then, I might look at the Night Stalker Netflix documentary series as well, but there's a few things that's depending on. One, the word count, because I've always got a lot to say about Netflix. And also I need another Ramirez example in another medium. So I don't know, Richard Ramirez, to be confirmed. Maybe I won't add that Night Stalker series in. Funny, isn't it, that there's some, and I don't know why, and I'm not even asking you to have the answer here, and I certainly don't have the answer. There's some cases that I return back to, and some that I'm just not bothered about, and Ramirez is definitely one I'm not bothered about. I think it's him. He's just so gross. All of them are gross, but he's particularly gross. Do you know what? The more I think about it, it's the descriptions of how bad his teeth and his breath were. I don't need to hear that again. I really don't. Chapter 5. Will it be chapter 5 by this point? Whatever it is, the next chapter will be podcasts. I looked at podcasts only a few episodes ago, and this chapter will basically be expanding on that stuff. The compression with comedy, freedom from regulation, the idea of the digital campfire, like how we all gather around to listen to a story, but at the time of our choosing. Chapter 6 will be about YouTube, certainly looking at Bailey Sarian, who we looked at in episode 3. This chapter will also explore Better Off Red and her True Crime series, and Brittany Vaughan, who, like Bailey and Better Off Red, does her makeup at the same time. There's so much intertextuality going on in these videos, from the YouTube conventions to the beauty influencer modes, to the memes, the clips that the creators put into their videos, the use of comedy and humour again, loads to discuss. And then the last chapter, before the conclusion, will be comics. And again, case studies I've already looked at back in episode 8, but I'll also include other case studies such as Did You Hear What Eddie Gein Done?, which is an absolute beauty of a comic. It's beautifully drawn, which tells the story of Gein through his fractured understanding of his world, a world of Heartland America, his public persona, like how he knew to behave in public, and how his house was filled, brimming with body parts. And then a comic called Green River Killer about Gary Ridgway. This comic is a classic detective story in stark and heavy black and whites with very sketchy loose detail on the faces. It seems at times that one person blends into another, or one character blends into another on the page, making the killer seem like every and any other person. And then, in the far off future of researching and writing and watching and listening and analysing and editing and crying and drinking, I imagine, I'll get to the conclusion chapter of the book, which will just wrap it up. So that's the book then. That's kind of where I am at the moment. That's how I'm seeing all the chapters breaking down. That's some of the case studies. Obviously, I can't tell you everything now because I haven't written it yet. So what else is there to come in the Murder Media project? Cast your minds back, and I'll cast my mind back as well, to episode 1 when I introduced the project. I said there would be other stuff going on, and I mentioned a symposium. I can confirm now that that will be happening. I've got some funding from the university, so I can put together a one-day murder media symposium. So soon, or very soon, if it's not already out by the time this episode comes out, but certainly soon if it's not out yet, I will put out the call for papers. Listeners who are colleagues, you know what I mean by that. Listeners who are not, a call for papers is what it says really. It's a thing that you put out that tells people that the event is happening, what the themes are, what it's about, what the event aims to do, and then you ask people to submit a proposal if they want to come and give a paper at the event. And then you supply a list of suggested topics to kind of get people going, and also so people can know if their research, if their ideas are going to be relevant to the event. So this will be the Murder Media Symposium, and we'll be exploring topics like true crime hybrids, true crime and streaming, true crime and backlash or ethics, serial killers in other media, serial killers and celebrity culture, true crime and social media, true crime and people of colour, true crime and LGBTQIA+ communities, true crime and the supernatural, the use of archived material to tell stories or to change the narrative or to look back on archives with a different lens, crime and comics, transnational crime, and trailers, promotional materials, paratexts or clickbait. And there are more topics as well. This isn't the full list, and neither do speakers have to stick to the list. It's just there, like I said, to help people kind of, get their ideas going. The The event will be free and will be open to all. So follow the Murder Media podcast on social media, Instagram at Murder Media 81 and Facebook for updates on that when tickets go live. And when the call for papers comes out, there'll be details on how to submit a proposal if you want to come and give a paper. The plan is also to record an episode of the Murder Media podcast at the symposium, some kind of round table situation is what I envisage. Do come along and keep your eye out for when all of that goes, all of that information becomes public. The social media will continue as I leave off the podcast for a while to concentrate on teaching and concentrate on writing those 2 chapters around teaching. I can do it. It'll be fine. Who needs to sleep? It'll be grand. And I might consider doing some minisodes if something really needs talking about, like if I can't hang on until the next series for something. So maybe perhaps after the new Monster series comes out, the Menendez series, 19th of September, that's due to land on Netflix. So maybe I'll talk about that, or maybe we could just chat it on the socials as each episode comes out. We'll see how the semester goes. I can't really say right now. It depends how the semester one, how crazy it is. It's always pretty crazy, to be honest. So what did we learn in the first series of the Murder Media podcast? There's no test, it's okay. We learned that the title sequence on Conversations with the Killer that Ted Bundy takes is problematic as hell. We learned that mediated serial killers are presented as monstrous, other, and that they're not part of the same patriarchal system that we all live in, except they are. We learned that there are different ways to approach a well-known story. It can be done with empathy. It can look at victims and survivors, and it turns out you can hardly hear from the killer at all. We don't even need to hear from these dickheads. We learned that new media forms hybridise true crime with all kinds of other genres. We looked at comedy and makeup tutorials in particular. We learned that true crime seems to get passed down through generations of women. Now, we've only got 2 examples, Laura and Shelley, but that's enough for me. That's the way it is. We learned that podcast hosts and listeners develop parasocial relationships, and that Instagram provides a safe space to have a favourite serial killer and to say that you have a favourite serial killer. But we also learned that the impulses of self-promotion on social media still drives the engagement, even when you're discussing something as actually awful as the Dharma case. And we learned that comics push the reader to commit the murder themselves between panels. We learned that it was John, and I'm still standing by that. I still agree with that. And I learned that making a podcast is harder than you think, and I need a break. So the next series of the Murder Media podcast, I can't say for sure when it will be. In a perfect world, it'd be sooner rather than later, but I'm going to prioritise my job and writing these 2 chapters, and then I'll have the brain space to start this up again. So again, please come over to the socials because we can keep the project going over there. I'll keep posting, we can keep chatting. Look out for the call for papers for the symposium. And finally, I want to really, really thank everyone for their support with me doing this. It's really hard putting yourself out there. It's really scary. It's been a learning curve. I'm still learning. I've still got a lot to learn. I'd like to thank the guests again that came on. So Laura, Shelley, Tom, thank you for coming on. And do share this podcast with anyone that you think would be interested. Leave it a review, 5 stars, obviously. Like the socials. Follow the socials, comment on the socials as well, because that keeps that moving. And email me directly if you have any questions at murdermedia81, or you want to discuss something over email, or you have any suggestions that you think you'd like to see an episode on, or maybe do you want to come on the episode? As long as you're not a serial killer, it's fine. So I'll speak to you all again at some point in the future. Goodbye.